Okay, I don't see my ECP1 here. I'm very disappointed. Would my kids raise their hands? Where are they here? My children. Okay, so my kids were very worried about me coming here because, well, I'm going to embarrass them, of course. And in fact, they appeared in the TED Talk. I took pictures of them and showed them there. Jacob had a quizzical look on his face. So I'm going to do a couple of things to begin with, since this is a school thing and you guys are, is everybody a senior? Are these juniors and seniors? All seniors? Oh, the whole upper school. Wow. Okay. So people that wear glasses, I want you to take your glasses off. Okay. So does the room get blurry? Is it a little bit blurry? Okay, now put them back on. Comes back into focus. That's what the talk's going to feel like. Okay? So we're going to bring some things into focus, and I'll go high level with some stuff, and then you'll feel like I've gone out into the weeds. Hold your breath. I'm coming back out again. All right? Because I think it's important for you to hear two things, take away a couple of things. What I think the future is of the relationship between computing, sort of the future of computing, which is what your generation is going to have to deal with, and the mind, and the way the mind interacts with the way we network and compute things now, okay? And the second thing is what it might be like to have a life in science. So I graduated from a school just like this in Atlanta, Georgia. I was a senior, I think 117 years ago. We had running water and electricity, and we had guys like me come in, but the guy like me that we had come in would come in every year and show us his collection of African masks. And so by the time we got to the 27th African mask, it was just like I wanted to shiv myself to improve my mood. So, with no, okay. So we did the glasses test. Now this is the first, again, this is a school, so this is a test. Okay. Who can name what's on that screen? Okay, what's the other thing? What? A what? A stimulator? Okay, that's a good. Oh, it's. Well, one of them is the brain, so everybody gets a 50%. Anybody got a guess? A what? It's a portable kidney. If you lose your kidneys, and do I have a pointer up here? I don't have a pointer. If you lose your kidneys, you can take one of those things and hook yourself up every couple of days, and you can live for 25 years. 150 years ago, people had no idea how the kidney worked. They weren't even really sure the kidney was filtering your blood in the sense that it is filtering your blood, okay? It was mysterious. It's made out of stuff. The kidney's made out of the same stuff that composes your brain. Now, the difference is if your kidney gets sick, it talks to your liver and you turn yellow and you feel bad and your urine turns all sorts of colors and stuff, okay? That's obvious. If your brain gets sick, it used to be, several hundred years ago, you were possessed by demons, you were a weird person, you were ostracized, all. It was considered a psychological problem. It's a physical problem. It's an information processing problem, and that's what you'll get out of this, okay? We don't know how the brain works in detail yet, and we don't exactly know how we get the computing power out of it that we do, but it's just made out of stuff. We ought to be able to figure it out, okay? I guess that means we'll be carrying our brains around in a box later on. All right. Anybody know him? Now, this is John Hibbing, a colleague of mine back in his worm-eating days. That's a mouthful of worms he has. And anybody disgusted by this image? Okay. Would you believe that I can show your brain that image for 4 seconds, record activity in your brain for 25 seconds, and I can guess the degree to which you're a conservative or liberal? At 99% accuracy. More to come. We'll come back to that. All right? So let me tell you a little bit about the brain and why it's a hard problem. This is a neuron. Anybody ever seen a neuron before? This is a neuron on the left. It's called a pyramidal cell. It's in your cerebral cortex, which is the outer layers of your cortex here. There are 100 billion neurons in your brain. They make on the order of 10 to the 72nd power connections to other neurons in your brain. So there are more connections in your brain than there are stars in the Milky Way, all right? So your brain's figured out a couple of things. I've pointed them out here. One is miniaturization. So the biological wires that connect neurons to one another make on the order of 1.5 billion connections to other cells, in every cubic millimeter of tissue. A cubic millimeter is about 1/3 the size of a match head. Okay, so in 1/3 the size of a match head are 1 billion connections, and they're about 3 miles of wire. And that wire is self-repairing wire. When it wears out and when it needs new proteins put in the membrane and all this kind of stuff, it replaces them automatically and without consulting anyone, okay? So miniaturization and self-repair is something that the brain does that we don't know how to build machines that rival that yet. It's thought that, sorry, I'm not getting these arrows right here. It is thought that by and large, networks of neurons in your brain, this is an artist's rendition here, and this is a sparse rendition. It's much denser than that in actuality. Networks of neurons are the things that constitute brain activity. So when you're thinking about something, or you're making plans, or you're worrying about whether you're hungry, or you have to go to the bathroom, or something like that, there's electrical and chemical activity going on in your brain through networks. So there's not sort of spots in your brain devoted to one thing. These are network things. So the programs that run in your brain, as it were, are running on networks of neurons that generate brain activity. The big idea in the 20th century is right here. What is the relationship between your brain and your mind? So I was telling somebody in town here who I don't see in the audience, so I won't say their name. Oh, here's what I do. I try to connect the physical events in your brain to the way your mind works. Why would you want to do that? What good is that for? And the answer to that is, have you ever flipped on the news at night and not liked something you heard about in, Bosnia or Syria or Ohio or something like that, okay? Have you ever known anybody that was a drug addict? Have you ever had any depression in your family? Have you ever made a decision that you regretted one day? Or do you have behavior patterns that you don't even know how to explain? Do you have a kid, brother or sister that has autism spectrum disorder? It goes on and on and on and on and on and on. Who we are as a people and the way we organize ourselves in institutions and the way these institutions work and what they're about, like an educational institution, is all about who it is that our mind constructs and the cultures we build around ourselves. Not understanding that is something that we do at our peril. Okay? So it's an important problem. It's an important problem no matter where you start in terms of what you think about as important to you. There's a big idea that I think is a big idea. Not everybody would agree with me. That happened in the 20th century, and it was an idea had by a man called Alan Turing. Anybody know who Alan Turing is? That's good, right? From the Imitation Game movie and the Enigma machine and all that. Alan Turing invented a lot of things. He was a mathematician. One of the things he invented was the modern notion of the computational theory of mind. And I'll give you a cartoon in a second about what that is. He also invented the modern notion of what a computing machine is, called a Turing machine. Every computer on the planet is reasonably considered a Turing machine. It's the design that he thought of. It's his design of computation. How you take one string of symbols and convert them into another string of symbols. And in the process of that, do something that you want, have an output that you want to accomplish a task. He also had ideas about the brain and the mind. And the one that he had that I'm showing here and calling the computational theory of mind, in a sense, answered a 10,000-year-old philosophical problem, which is what is the difference between your brain and your mind? And Turing said, your mind isn't equal to your brain, as I depicted here. It's equal to the patterns of information processing supported by your brain, okay? Like a software program. So if you had a program in your computer, there are two big reasons why that program might not work. Reason number one is maybe there's something wrong with the computer. Some area of memory has burnout transistors, and that area can't store and retrieve information the right way. And so when you load your program on and you want it to play Hangman or whatever it is the program does, or you want it to control the cooling towers of a nuclear power plant, and an area of memory doesn't work, that program doesn't work very well. Alternatively, the computer could be completely intact, no part broken, but the program's bad. Any of you guys have programming classes? Can I see a show of hands of people that take programming here? Okay. You ever written a program that you had to debug? You've never written a program that you didn't have to debug. All programs have flaws in them. They have special cases you don't anticipate. They have mistakes that you didn't mean to do. They have typos. They have a semicolon in the wrong place. You forget whether that's a floating point number or an integer. It goes on and on and on and on. There can be things wrong with the software in your mind, the way it updates variables and the rate at which they're changed and all that that has nothing to do with the parts of your brain. So they're mental illnesses that we're going to come to understand as software problems that have nothing to do with the parts in your brain are getting old and senescent and don't work anymore, okay? That's an area that we're going to be calling computational psychiatry, and in fact, we're one of the centers of that here. There's a center in London, there's one in Zurich, and there's a couple more forming in Asia. And it's based on that idea, the computational theory of mind. So Turing solved this problem. How do you get mind-like stuff out of stuff-like stuff? The answer is your mind isn't equal to your brain. It's equal to the patterns of information processing your brain supports. So you can now imagine different kinds of brains supporting the same kind of information processing, but having sort of different physical implementations of it. That is, your brains are biological. There's variation across different people and different micro strategies inside your head. The way the tissue processes information may be different, but the programs are sort of the same. That's almost certainly why we can understand one another when we talk to each other. Okay? So that's the prevailing model. So that's a big idea. That's kind of the boring part of the talk. Maybe the rest of it's boring. The rest of it may put you, if that's boring, the rest of it puts you to sleep. So the big idea is that guys like me, who start out in mathematics and physics, and who move into trying to understand behavior and thought and mental activity and its relationship to the physical substrate of the brain, and then taking that and transporting that into the understanding and classification of mental dysfunction, or even the sustenance of healthy mental function, this is what we hope to do. We hope to build computational models on the left-hand side that depict what the tissue is doing and relate these models to computational models that we build in the behavioral space. In other words, we model your behavior with numbers. We model the operation of your brain with numbers, and we try to make these two things meet. It's called computational neuroscience. Okay, back to the worms. Okay, so this is John Hibbing in his more rational moments. This is not one of them. He's a political scientist at the University of Nebraska. I think it's in Lincoln, Nebraska. And he did work with a couple of molecular biologists in a twin registry in Australia. So a twin registry is a place that studies twins. And it studies the two kinds of twins. Are there any twins in here? Anybody a twin? Got a little light. No twins. Anybody want to be a twin? No? No, too late. Can't be a twin. All right. You're either from the same egg, in which case you're considered identical twins. The technical term is monozygotic twins. Or you're from separate eggs, but you develop in the same uterus. In both cases, you develop in the same uterus and you're delivered. And in one case, you come from exactly the same sequence of DNA. Okay? Identical versus fraternal. All right? And you can study them in that context in order to ask questions about how much of some traits they have, including mental traits, are due to their genes, because they really share environments there, and how much are due to an environment. And what they came to conclude was that something as abstract as political ideology is strongly heritable. And by heritable, I mean they're features of what you come to believe politically that look more like your parents than not, just because you're the children of your parents, and not because you've been raised to speak a specific language in a specific culture and have specific political beliefs. Okay, that doesn't sound... So they came to me. Hey, I knew him. I knew him through a colleague. Hey, Reed, we think political ideology is heritable. We want you to do a brain experiment on them. And I completely laughed him out of that. I said, that's ridiculous. I grew up in Macon, Georgia, and Atlanta, Georgia, and people there have an accent, and they have an accent the way it is because they're from Macon, Georgia. And if they were from Omaha, Nebraska, or Paris, France, they'd have different accents, they'd speak different things. Surely it's like that. Surely you absorb the sort of political beliefs around you. Long story short, that's wrong. That's just wrong. They're fundamental components of things that you would consider political, however abstract, you know, the way you think about things that are hot button subjects. If this were, as my wife said today, if this were a normal election, I'd make an analogy with this election, but it's just, I don't think it, I don't even know what to say, right? I'd need a banner behind myself and a police screen in front of me. Anyway, the current election is kind of goofy, but the fact is the numbers that you get when you compute the heritability of political ideology. And when I say political ideology, I mean traditional conservatives versus traditional liberals. I don't mean party affiliation, okay? So, and the issues that differentiate are typically social issues. Things to do with the family, abortion, gun control, big government, small government, issues that seem like they should be dependent on the culture, but they really are dependent in large part on who your parents were. That's not to say completely dependent. Height is only 1/2 dependent on the genes that you get from your parents. See, if you have tall parents, you're very likely to be tall, but only half of your tallness comes from the fact that those happen to be your parents. Same thing, it rivals height. It's about 1/2. But there's nothing that big. There's no other trait, eye color, or hair color, other kinds of things you do that's like that. So that's interesting. Let me tell you what I think the answer is. I think the answer is, the crude answer, the big sketch is, there's a core of personality traits that tend to protect you from threat from the environment. One is the two big threats a long time ago, before we really had big cultures, were threat from contamination and threat from violence, like physical threat, okay? And if you were slow to react to physical threat, or you don't plan for physical threat, or you don't build a fence around where you happen to live, and all the things that we do to guard ourselves from this from physical threats, we're not talking about you anymore. If you're a culture that, instead of being grossed out by this, prizes this and builds your slaughterhouse right next to your latrine, then we're not talking about you either, because you all got sick and died. So the way you understand and treat and handle contamination, and the way you treat and understand and handle physical threat were crucial personality traits, if you will. And then cultures grew out of that, the way you organize a society and the way, okay, so that's the kind of hand-wavy explanation of that. All right, you can take people and you can show them, you can put them in a brain imaging machine, and I'm going to show you what I mean by a brain imaging machine. This is a paper we published this in 2014, and it makes several points. The first is you can show them images just like I showed you. That I can't show you the images that we showed because it's a protected class of images that everybody uses. It's called the International Affective Picture System, the IAP system. They're emotionally evocative images, both positive, negative, and neutral. So, you know, rabbits and blowing fields and daffodils, neutral things like, you know, newspapers and pictures of curbs, and then gross things like you saw there, you know, flies on salad and a guy eating worms, okay? And they've been rated by people. So we have numbers associated with these pictures already based on thousands of people that have rated them, but they're kept kind of locked up. You can't show them to the public because it would pollute the populations that would use them in experiments. But you just show them pictures. Here, line the scanner, watch these pictures. Boom, 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 boom. They get out of the scanner, and then they come over to a computer, and we say, well, we have this other experiment for you, and we want you to take this test. So they take this test where they answer questions about political ideology. And really all they do is they answer the question, so suppose it says big government. You have a slider bar, and you either say strongly agree, uncertain, strongly disagree. And so you set this continuous bar, the degree to which that sort of strikes a chord with you. Cold, rational people, like me, we tend to be in the middle here. Sort of true believers tend to go right and left, or people for whom some dimension is a real hot button issue, they'll go way out, okay? What we then do is we take a very modern, what's called machine learning method. This is a statistical method for relating the brain activity on the pictures to the answers on the test, and we build a mapping between the two. And we ask the question, can we predict from the brain response to the non-political images what their score on the test is going to be, or the score on a certain subcategory of the test is going to be? Well, the answer is ridiculous. I mean, the answer is we're almost 100% accurate if we use 60 pictures. We're at like 99.9% accurate if we use 15 pictures. And I can show one picture for 4 seconds and take it away, and I'm still in the mid-90s. Okay, so that's a little bit crazy. This project, this shows you who was on the project. I'm the last name on there, you see. But these are people from, the first author is Korean, the third author is from Beijing, the second author is from Oklahoma, I'm from wherever. The second to last author, Peter Dan, he's from London and lives there. These kinds of teams get built, and they're very international in the scope, and that's the way science goes now. That's the way interactions across the globe go now. So this is a remarkable, needless to say, this created quite the buzz, but we're using this to move on, and so I've only done a few interviews on this. The kind of imaging we do is shown right here. This is called a magnetic resonance imaging machine. Has anybody ever had an MRI in the room? Yeah? Okay. So the MRI that you had was in one mode. It took a snapshot of your knee, was it knees, stomachs, brains, right? And it makes these gray level images. So it takes a snapshot of the structure of your brain or a snapshot of the structure of your knee. It was discovered in about 1990 that you could use these machines in a different mode, and instead of taking a snapshot, you could make microscopic blood flow movies from 100,000 sites all throughout your brain. Okay, so what, you know? Here's my trip to Alaska. Here's my brain blood flow movies. Why are you all going to sleep? Why that's cool is that when you make a microscopic blood flow movie, the brain is a highly efficient organ, and it doesn't store any energy. So when it needs energy in a local area of tissue, it asks for the blood to flow in. The blood flows in, oxygen moves off your hemoglobin and exposes the iron atom, and we can pick that up. We can pick that up. We can take that, the magnetic field change due to the exposed iron atom can be picked up in this machine, and we can do it dynamically. So we can get these little blood flow movies from all over the brain, and since they're tightly correlated with the degree to which your neurons are changing their activity, then the blood flow movies become like watching neural activity. It's completely revolutionized our study of cognition in healthy human beings, because before we had functional magnetic resonance imaging, we couldn't record deep in your brain unless you were sick, unless you were being monitored for neurosurgery or they're trying to find an epileptic focus, an area of your brain that starts seizures, and then you put microwires in brains. But now if you want to put, you know, John and Susan Smith in, you can bring them down, you lie in this machine, nothing touches you, you look at a screen, you press some buttons, maybe you swallow some juice, and we start to study the way you think and perceive, and in my particular case, the way you interact with other people. Okay? This is the kind of thing that you get when you show the images and you're trying to say who's a liberal, who's a conservative. So the sort of warm colors you see there at the top, those are predicting the conservative group. And the cool colors, the details of this don't matter, but the cool colors are predicting the liberal group. The thing to notice is I've divided it out according to the sort of a categorization of the images. Animal reminder are like dead animals and piles of mutilated meat, and I mean really gross stuff. Core contamination is like flies on a salad. These are the images that did the prediction. The good images and the neutral images didn't do that. But what you can see is that the cool colors, look at the bottom row there, the cool colors are activating networks that are distinct from the warm colors. Usually what we do is we average over the data and we look at lots and lots of people, and this was a really big experiment. Literally a novice could have looked at the raw data, I'm not showing you the raw data here, and said, oh, well, that's different than that, and sorted the images. That's why we were so lucky in being able to do this prediction. We're now digging into what it means. That's what the brain says. But here's what your behavior says. On all of the images, all of the subjects were called back. It's about 130 people. Did anybody do this experiment here? Is anybody in the room that's done this experiment? No. Okay. So these were people from the New River Valley, people from around here. And they're asked to rate the stimuli, right? So look at the far left here. That's liberal, moderate, and conservative, okay? The thing to notice is there's no difference in the ratings across the political categories. So their conscious behavior is, oh, I think that's a 7 on the disgusting scale, and maybe I'm a bleeding heart liberal, and you say, oh, that's a 7 on the disgusting scale, and you're right of Hitler in your politics. And so, but the thing is, your conscious choices don't distinguish this at all. You cannot just study the behavior, but your brain betrays you, right? And being able to eavesdrop on that has exposed it, okay? Example number 2, and this gets us into the future. We've started using a series of what could be called social exchange game, reciprocation games. You play this with your parents all the time. I'll take out the trash if you give me an extra $20. I'll go rake the yard if You guys do chores in here? You guys do chores in here? Does anybody do chores? See, nobody does chores. I don't feel so bad. Oh, 7 people do chores. Okay. But there's a kind of contract with your parents over that, and it goes back and forth. It's loose. This is a rigorous contract. Let me show you the tasks that we do. We have two people, and they do these kind of tasks. In this particular case, it's called an ultimatum game. Player red is given $100, and they offer a split to the blue player. Okay? Let's say 80 red, 20 to the blue player. Control passes to the blue player can accept, in which case red gets 80, blue gets 20, or they can reject, in which case no one gets anything. Okay. So who would reject an 80-20 split? I see a sleeping row here. Okay. You would reject that? Okay. How about a 90-10 split? 90 me, 10 you. You would not reject that. You would still reject that. Why are you rejecting that? Okay. But we started with nothing, right? So a cold rational agent, a cold economic agent would say, well, I started with nothing. Any non-zero offer is good. I'll take anything that's not zero. But that's not how people behave. They want to send a signal to you. I will not put up with an inequitable split, okay? And as simple as that game is, we've used that game to probe the way people interact through time and to probe people with autism spectrum disorder, major depression, ADHD. And the reason is this, and I'll show you why. That game, as simple as it is, if you play it over and over again, means that you have to have at least 3 levels of thinking available to you. You have to come to the table understanding what's fair to any other human, and it has to be sort of in range of the population of people. You have to have a first-order model of what the other guy's going to take. You have to think, what does red think is fair? And red has to be able to think, what does blue think is fair? And then they have to have the most important thing, which is what we call second-order belief. You have to have a model of the other guy's model of you. If you don't, that's a job interview. If you sit in a job interview or a school interview, you send signals to the guy across the table to manipulate your image in their mind. That means you have to have a model in your head of what they think you're like, and you send signals over to sort of move that around. Okay? No, I'm not dishonest. You know, I didn't mean to steal the car. It was a mistake. All right? It wasn't a theft. It was a mistake. Not a theft, mistake. Okay, that's called second-order belief. And that's something that breaks in autism spectrum disorder. That's something that appears to not even be there. We don't know why. So if you use a task like this to probe a kid actively in an interaction with something, you can develop quantitative measures of the way they do the social exchange differently, and you can scan their brain while you're doing it. This is an effort that we have going on here in Roanoke. It's a large-scale effort now. I have a site, an extra site in Hong Kong, which I haven't shown. There's a site in London that's doing this. We have 20 sites in north-central London. We're doing games like this at those sites. We're streaming data between the two places. It's really kind of a global experiment. We're now up to, I think, 600 people. We have to match them in the London cohort versus there is a cultural issue about matching them in London and Hong Kong and the New River Valley. And then we're studying people that have what are called borderline personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder. And those we're getting only in the London cohort. London's a densely populated place. It's easy to get them. I just wanted to give you a taste of the way this kind of experiment runs. I'm not going to give you the details of it, but I'm going to show you a couple of things. So number one is, here's a brain at the upper left playing this reciprocation game. In this area that I've shown there with the hot voxels on it, the little red, the little yellow squares, is showing a region that comes on when you're reciprocating correctly with me. So if I give you some money and you give me some money back, I give you some money and you accept it, I give you some more money and you accept it, I give you money, you reject it. So we're kind of going back and forth like this. And as long as we are neutral, like you're responding to me, this area monitors that. And as soon as you deviate from it, it kind of goes crazy. We can monitor the way that area of the brain goes crazy, and we can make predictions about what you're about to do next, 22 seconds into the future, okay? 6 years ago, it was 2 seconds into the future. 3 years ago, I was at 22 seconds, and now I'm at like a day. I can do a task like this, I can bring you back the next day, and I can know how you're going to start playing it again, okay? So it's progressing a lot. We're being able to take games like that, decode what the brain is doing, and use it to predict behavior over longer and longer periods of time. So what we're interested in doing is tracking normal development of normal brains. We don't have a picture of that. One of the things we don't have a picture of at all is what does it mean? What is the envelope of normal brain development and things on reciprocation. If you don't interact with other humans very well, a lot of things goes wrong with your life, go wrong with your life, okay? This is an application in London to people playing the same sort of game that have borderline personality disorder, and these are people who cannot cooperate on these games. Cooperation breaks down completely, and it's a disorder that generates a lot. It's a psychiatric disorder that has a lot of what's called comorbidity with depression. That means if you have borderline, you tend to be depressed. Nobody knows how to treat it, and it's resistant to all drugs. Well, using these kinds of games, we found a response in the borderline brain that looks like their brain responds to all offers on these sorts of fairness games as though they're profoundly unfair, okay? It's an area called the Insula. It sits right here, and you can monitor it to decide whether or not. So we have the first physical signature for the disorder, which means we have a signature that we could track if we wanted to do a therapy. The best therapy you can do for these kinds of things now are video games. This is a very hot industry in young people, but it's also going to end up being a hot industry in the treatment of mental and psychiatric disorders, especially mild ones. Okay, so it's much better than it's much more fun than psychotherapy because, you know, you can win a video game. All right, let me go forward. Autism spectrum disorder. I'm gonna close with this. This is my third example, again in the medical domain. So the group here, this is work by a woman called Pearl Chu, who is a professor over at the Institute with me, and at the time she was a postdoctoral fellow with me that she did this. She took and used these reciprocating games and put children characterized with autism spectrum disorder on one side of the interaction and healthy people on the other side of the interaction. And she took advantage of software we've written that synchronizes the scanners over Internet 2. Anybody know what Internet 2 is? No? Anybody know what the Internet is? Yeah? Okay. So we've taken brain scanning machines and we've built software that talks to the global positioning satellite network and synchronizes these machines anywhere they are in the world and lets people play social interaction games. And then we eavesdrop simultaneously onto the two brains, right? What Pearl did was put autistic kids on one side and a set of control subjects on the other side and had them play these games. And we found response, which is highlighted here. This is the side of a brain. The two little yellow dots are where the response was that characterized the autistic kids. We had responses there during the execution of the game that said the degree to which the clinical measures said they were autistic. Okay, so these clinical measures, you take a clinician, you go in there, you check off a list, you have the kids do tests and all this kind of stuff, and we have one little brain response, and we can predict these numbers in these kids. So this is the kind of social interaction game and brain scanning experiment that you could use to treat or at least get insight into autistic kids. All right. In closing, I'm going to end with one little pointer to the future here. One of the things I can't show you because you are still in high school and it would bore you absolutely to death because sometimes it bores me, is sort of the mathematics behind some of this. So there's a lot of mathematics behind what we do. So my teams of people are typically composed of somebody that's the mathematician type, like me, and somebody that's a kind of psychologist type, but a different kind of psychologist. These aren't soft-edge psychologists. These are experimental psychologists, do the sorts of things I was just showing you then. The algorithms that we use are called reinforcement learning algorithms, and they're from an area of what's called machine learning. Now, machine learning is an area of engineering and software engineering and learning where computer programs learn from experience. It's the current incarnation of artificial intelligence. This is a paper published in the journal Nature in May 2015 by a group in London called, at the time, DeepMind. It's now been bought by Google. Google now owns DeepMind. Using reinforcement learning to play all the networks, to play all the Atari games, Centipede and Space Invaders, and there are about 90 of them, and show that they could train that network to play at expert level, and it beats human performance on 90% of the games. This year, about 2 months ago, the same approach, they call it deep Q learning. Doesn't matter what it is, it sounds cool. They use deep Q learning networks to play the game of Go. Everybody know what the game, everybody heard of Go? Americans are terrible at Go. Asian cultures are fantastic at Go. So they played what is, although there's not a real world champion, everybody knows this Korean guy is the best guy in the world. China has a champion, Japan has a champion, Korea has a champion. The guy in Korea beats everybody. And he gave up in 2 hours. So they trained a deep Q-learning network to play the game of Go. It's a game of position and surround, and it's difficult. We use exactly the same algorithm that they use in the deep Q-learning networks to play the Go champion to understand how to model these social exchange games. In fact, the third reference there where it says neuroscientific perspectives, that's a reference to my work with Pearl Chu that I was just pointing out to you. So the interesting thing here is that now AI and biology are marrying up. So as you go forward and you start thinking about what you might do, there are a whole bunch of things that people hadn't even thought about before. This thing in my back pocket, this cell phone, I went back and looked at a paper I wrote in 1993. This cell phone has more computing power than the San Diego Supercomputer Center did when I was using it in 1993. Okay, I couldn't have guessed that. I couldn't have guessed that. So we don't know where things are going to be in 10 years. Your generation is going to inherit a lot of interesting things to do and of course, a lot of problems too. So thanks for having me.